Yes. Good evening. My name is Wallace Bradley, and I'm the host of the Bradley Report. I'm also the president of United in Peace, Inc. I got a very interesting show with a commentary. I just got one link I was able to get for you to see. An individual had been released from the penitentiary for being locked up wrongfully convicted for 34 years for a crime that he didn't commit. The city ended up settling for $25 million. But the real story that's behind that is that the city keep paying private attorneys in the tune of millions and millions of dollars, knowing that they can't win the case. That's beside the $25 million that the city had to settle. What do you mean by that, Gator? Okay, I'm a private attorney. I know I can't win this suit. This police tortured the individual. They found out he didn't do the crime for 25 years. So I'm a private law firm. So I'm charging the city to the tune of $2 million for 3 years that I represented them for this case, knowing that I can't win. They came to that conclusion to settle for $25 million when it dawned on them that the new chairman of the finance committee and the alderman in my midst asked why we settling now. They said because we couldn't win the case. I'm gonna share this one thing that I can show you by the name of Mark Maxson, an individual that was tortured by police officers that was hooked up with John Burge. I know all of you, my viewing audience, heard about John Burge and those police officers and how they was torturing African Americans to commit the crimes that they didn't commit. There was a story on Channel 7 that said how this city then paid over $1 billion to private attorneys to define cases. $1 billion. That's why there's always a hole in the city budget. The budget that the mayor has put out, the new mayor, talking about Brandon Johnson, is where he budget where the law department budget, maybe about $40-some million. But the fact that the racket that's known as the pinstripe patronage is charging the city to the tune of down almost, I know it's a family show, over $1 billion. I'm gonna show you this clipping with Mark Maxson, but first let me let you know, the issues on this show is put together by the chairman of United in Peace, Inc. He's the producer of this show, none other than my wife, Terry Marsh Bradley. There's some other things I want to talk about, but we're going to talk about stop wasting taxpayers' dollars. Because the city of Chicago is having a budget hearing, and they're going through with a fine-tooth comb on how to make sure they got enough money for the migrants, enough money for the homeless. One of the things that you can do is call your alderman so they can let the mayor know, stop paying private attorneys when you have a law department that represents the city of Chicago. So there's no wasteful spending.
But we began everybody tonight with a man wrongly convicted of murder walking out of prison today.
New evidence has cleared Mark Maxson of a murder that occurred more than 20 years ago. He was serving a life sentence at Stateville Prison near Joliet. Eyewitness News reporter Evelyn Holmes was there when Maxson walked out. Evelyn?
Well, Mark Maxson has been free for just about over an hour now. After years of professing his innocence, it is new DNA evidence that finally freed him. After spending nearly half of his life in prison for a crime he says he didn't commit, Mark Maxson is finally a free man.
That's the best feeling that I could have, because my mother was there, the only, my mother's my stability.
The elated 55-year-old smiled as he walked out of the Stateville Correctional Center near Joliet this afternoon, only hours after a Cook County judge threw out his conviction for the murder of a 6-year-old boy on Chicago's South Side.
I wasn't going to give up on him.
No.
And I did what I could.
Maxson was sentenced to life in prison for the 1992 slaying of first grader Lindsay Murdoch. Investigators focused in on Maxson after he told a TV reporter that he'd bought chips for the child and told him to go home. The boy was found dead the next day in an abandoned garage near 107th and State. In a statement, a spokesperson for the Cook County State's Attorney, Anita Alvarez, writes that after an exhaustive reinvestigation, the conviction of Mr. Maxson could not stand. A criminal investigation into the 1990.
You know, I went to Stateville Penitentiary to pick that man up from Stateville because he was freed because they realized that he did not commit that crime. The individual that committed the crime got caught because he had committed another murder. And they swabbed him and they did his DNA and they put it in the system. When he got out of the penitentiary for murder, talking about the other individual that committed the murder, he did not go and register. So they locked him up again. And in the meantime, Mark Maxson's lawyer had got the right through the courts to put a DNA thing out there, because the DNA that they got from Mark Maxson and the DNA that they got from the victim did not match the DNA that they found at the scene of the crime. So when his lawyer, Mark Maxson's lawyer, put that in, Alex Zinger is his attorney. I just happen to be the urban translator because that's what I do. I help to free the wrongfully convicted, especially when the police officers were the ones that tortured them to commit the crimes that they didn't do. When they put it in, they got a hit. And the hit was this individual that committed that crime. He confessed to doing the crime. He wrote letters to Mark Maxson and the family of the victim, the crime victim family. He said he was sorry and everything else. He ended up getting 50 years because of the crime that he committed. Mark Maxson ended up getting a certificate of innocence. I know because I was there 6 years later. The money that the city of Chicago paid these two private law firms was in the close to $3.5 million for a crime that they know they can't win on the behalf of their clients, which was the city of Chicago. They're doing this because they know the money is not coming out of the law department's budget. They only have a budget of $40 million. This other individual that I'm talking about, that just got the $25 million. Let me get you his name right quick. It says, a former detective tried for wrongful convictions. A former detective tied to wrongful convictions that cost millions, and he still receives his pension. The city of Chicago has forked over tens of millions of dollars in recent years to people wrongfully convicted because of actions by Chicago police. Members of the city council have asked whether the police officers involved in these cases are still getting their city pensions. It's a question that hasn't gotten an answer. And then CBS Channel 2 News did it for you. Chris Tate, T-Y-E, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, uncovered new details that reveal the money going to the officers named in the lawsuit have cost the city huge sums of money. Massive payoffs were given to avoid litigation because of wrongful doing of police officers decades ago. It's not a topic that the city likes to talk about. Talking about police torture by John Burge and the other police officers. Hundreds of men, African Americans and Hispanic. But in the recent settlement, details against officers were so inflammatory that the city viewed a $25 million settlement as is far better than going to trial. The case filed against the city and police officers by Tyrone Hood and Wayne Washington. Both were wrongfully convicted in the 1993 murder of a 19-year-old Chicago basketball standout player from Marshall. His name is Marshall Morgan Jr. They said they 34 years behind bars were the result of Chicago police detectives fabricating evidence and forcing others to identify them. But a trial, according to the attorneys that's representing the law department, the last time the city settled a Boudreaux, that's the officer's name, case was 2017. There were 4 companion cases that this officer was involved in, and it was settled for a total of $30 million, said Jessica Felker of Chicago Law Department. But they don't say or make mention of the private attorneys. They got paid to represent the city, knowing that they couldn't win this case. We're gonna get back to Mark Maxon. The city, Mark Maxon, he was suing the city for $56 million. The city has paid these private law firms, Hale and Monaco, from January the 11th to 2017 to August 10th, 2023, $1,420,591.72. The other law firm is Soto's law firm from December 31st, 2016 to July 31st, 2023, $2,018,661.16 for a total of $3,439,252.88 to defend the defendants in a 50-plus federal wrongful conviction Chicago police torture case, which is indefensible. They are robbing the city, therefore creating holes in that budget.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson inheriting a long list of lawsuits against the city by wrongfully convicted people who have certificates of innocence which are granted by a judge. One such case just settled for $14.5 million. Yet City Hall's pattern of practice is to fight these cases for years sometimes, spending tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer funds. It's a practice that's been costing us for decades.
It's all about redemption.
Jacques Rivera spent 21 years in prison before being exonerated for the murder of a 16-year-old on Chicago's West Side. The sole witness eventually recanted.
Overjoyed just to hear that he was willing to come forward with the truth.
A Cook County judge granted Rivera a certificate of innocence in 2012, and then he sued the city. 6 years later, a jury awarded Rivera $17 million. Rivera says that he asked the city's lead attorney, who worked for an outside firm, why they fight cases like his.
And he said, the city's paying us anyways to fight them. So that's what we're going to do.
Rivera says he would have settled early on for much less.
I was willing to walk away with $10 million.
Former federal prosecutor Ron Safer says today the city is still following the same playbook.
How are we going to learn from mistakes if you deny that mistakes are ever made?
Safer represented Eddie Bolden, who was exonerated in 2016 and awarded a certificate of innocence.
I went to the city and said, before we filed the lawsuit, said, look, he's been in jail for 22 years. He would like his money now. And he'll take a lot less now than we'll get at trial. They offered nothing. He won a verdict of $25.2 million.
And just last month, he settled Arthur Brown's case against the city for $14.5 million. Before filing a lawsuit, Safer sent a letter to the Corporation Counsel.
And I wrote him a letter, and I said, you've been quoted in the newspaper as saying it is horrendous how much money the city is paying for these cases. Here's a perfect opportunity. Arthur is 67 years old. We will go to the jury and we will ask for tens of millions of dollars. But talk to us now. He will take a small fraction of that. They sent me back a letter that I have laminated by my desk that I kept for years. It was that I had insulted them, I was unprofessional, and they would offer nothing.
Since then, the city has paid outside law firms more than $3.2 million to fight Brown's case, according to information the I-Team received from a public records request.
There are a group of firms that for years have been making tens of millions of taxpayer dollars defending indefensible cases.
Andrew Stroth is James Gibson's attorney.
He was convicted of a double murder he didn't commit. He spent 29 years, 4 months, 7 days in 4 maximum security prisons.
Gibson filed a federal lawsuit against the city in 2019 and is expected to go to trial next year.
Big issue for Brandon Johnson is there's at least 17 cases behind the James Gibson case where the plaintiff has a certificate of innocence. It's our estimate that hundreds of millions or even more than $1 billion of lawsuits are facing the city of Chicago.
Let's get people paid who were thrown in jail for crimes they didn't commit because they were corrupt police officers.
And it wasn't about the money with me. It was about justice. It was about clarification and making a wrong right.
Arthur Brown's multi-million-dollar settlement to be considered by the City Council Finance Committee next month. Chicago's law department that handles all these cases and settlements declining to comment for this report. The department doesn't currently have a permanent leader. Mayor Brandon Johnson has yet to appoint what's called the Corporation Counsel. We asked the mayor to talk about this billion-dollar problem. We never heard back.
I got those numbers. I know them gentlemen. And by the grace of God, He has allowed me, a former inmate of Stateville Penitentiary, to be able to be out and be free, to help push legislation about criminal justice reform to the point that I got a pardon. But this is what I want to let my viewing audience know. Now that the city is having hearings on their budgets, the new chairman of the Finance Committee, 3rd Ward Alderman Pat Dow, chairman of the Budget Committee, is 20th Ward Jason Irvin. You got a right to tell them, stop giving that money to those corrupt law firms. I'm saying they corrupt because they know that they can't win those cases. Yet they charging taxpayers all that money. So if you going in under the auspices that, hey, you got a chance to win, and you know they ain't got a chance to win, that's fraud. Settle with Mark Maxson and them other individuals that was tortured by John Burge, because the city's insurance takes care of that. Stop paying them bogus law firms because they taking taxpayers' dollars out of a budget and creating a hole in the budget. And that's why the mayor can't deal with the issues that's before him, like homelessness, bringing other revenues in. I thank God that Congressman Jackson wrote a letter to the Department of Justice and Homeland Security for them to investigate that governor in Texas from sending in migrants here. I thank God for allowing the mayor to have the 6th Ward Alderman, Will Hall, the 4th Ward Alderman, Mr. Lomax, and 3 other aldermen to go to the border to check and see what's really happening, and they find out the reason their city ain't in the same situation like Chicago and New York is because the federal government gave them the monies to help alleviate whatever problem they was having. So I'm like this, if you're gonna send them migrants here, then send them here with the purse, the money that's allocated to take care of them. But I'm saying this, City of Chicago, voters, call your alderman. They having a budget hearing right now. Call them to say, to question the law department and the finance department, and to say, stop paying them, settle them cases just like y'all came to the conclusion after that story that's on Channel 7. I want to commend Chuck Gowen for having that FOIA, and people put in the FOIA. I got the Freedom of Information about what's going down, and I ain't nothing but the host of the Bradley Report. But I'm a resident voter, I'm a citizen in the city of Chicago, and I can do it, you can do it, find out where they're spending that money, and if they spend that money correctly. With that, I want to say to God be the glory. That's my story. Follow that money.